and it is item A, Financial Series number 8, CESA 1, Student Enrollment, and it is Sarah Viera of CESA 1.
Final presentation. This one is all related to student enrollment and why it matters. And I could have probably put some test questions in here for you guys because, right, we've talked a lot about this through revenue limit, equalization aid. So hopefully some of this will seem familiar to you. But if not, that's okay too. So just a reminder, this is what CESA has presented on to date. So we are at the final presentation, and the goal of these presentations really was to help the district bridge that bridge transparency with the community and just bring some further understanding around school district financials. So the purpose of today, we're going to take a look at how student membership counts impact district finances. And this is relative to all districts. So what we talk about today is what other districts experience as well. But I did sprinkle in some specific Germantown examples. And we're really going to focus on open enrollment, and then we'll touch on voucher programs, and we'll talk a little bit about declining enrollment as well, since that is such a hot topic for districts. So I wanted to start just giving a snapshot of what Germantown's enrollment has done, this taking it back to 16-17, so just kind of a historical snapshot. And you can kind of see, and this is very typical across a lot of public school districts, that dip from 1920 to 2021. That was that year where a lot of districts saw students making different choices, families making different choices when it comes to enrollment and whether they wanted their students to be in public schools or not. So that's really where a lot of districts saw a drastic dip. And in Germantown's case, you can see that started to kind of creep back up. And there might have been I know there's been a ton of development in the area, so kind of bounced around a little bit since then. Most important thing to always remember, and I hope if you take one thing away from this presentation or maybe this whole series, is that students really do drive revenue, right? And it's so important to recognize your membership as part of that driving and really creating that revenue limit authority that each district has. So jumping into student membership, this is where we could have a test question, right? So what does membership mean? That it is not you walking into a classroom and doing a head count of the kids in that classroom. Membership is a calculation that is defined by the state. It is based on a full-time equivalent, not individual students. So if a 4K student could be a 0.6, it could be a 0.5, depending on how a district decides to treat that. And then obviously kindergarten through 12th grade, those are full FTEs. So when you are doing that count during your enrollment counts each year, those students have to be put into that full-time equivalent. Membership is, as we've learned, used for determining funding and revenue limit calculations. It's treated differently and used for different purposes, whether you're utilizing the membership for revenue limit or for equalization aid purposes. So when we think about student counts, what students are we talking about? So who's included in that? So obviously resident students, right? We need to count the residents that are within our boundaries, and those are students who are attending our district schools. We have to include count date eligible students. Those are students that are meeting DPI under attendance rules, and a little bit into the weeds here, but on a specific count date, so whether it's the third Friday count or the second Friday count, there is some flexibility in there. So say that a student isn't present on the day of the count. Can we still count them? In most cases, yes. So the Department of Public Instruction does have some rules built into there so we don't miss out on counting students. I would also say too that there is protection in case you do miss counting a student, and they are eligible to be in your count, whether it's the September count or the January count. And then there's some additional defined categories through the Department of Public Instruction. We look at summer school, right? We talked about how that is counted at 40% membership. There are, and we'll talk about some student voucher and choice student programs. And then also if we have students that are homeless and maybe in a foster or group home situation, we're still able to count them in certain situations. So why does membership matter so much? And again, we've been building up to this moment, right? We've talked about how it impacts revenue limits, and revenue limits, it determines how how much money a district gets through the state funding formula. It impacts state aid calculations, and state aid has that inverse relationship with our revenue limit and our property tax levy, so that is creating property tax impact. And then lastly, because it has such a large impact on revenue limits and state aid calculations, it impacts our long-term budgeting and our forecasting for the district. So getting into actually counting students. So I've mentioned briefly 2 different count dates. So every district in the state of Wisconsin participates in both of these. So we have the 3rd Friday count in December, which is that primary count date, and it is a major factor in revenue limits and state aid calculations. And then there's another count that happens in January called the 2nd Friday in January count. Very unique name. And so this is really used as kind of that mid-year adjustment. So maybe we did miss some in the 3rd Friday count. We can adjust for that in the 2nd Friday. And then, again, just really capturing those enrollment changes. You might be wondering, why does Wisconsin use 2 count dates? And so really it is because the state recognizes that enrollment can change throughout the school year. So we have students that move in and out of the district. We have students that might transfer schools. They might enroll after the school year begins and weren't in that first count date. So utilizing those 2 count dates really does create a better, more accurate picture of the membership that you have within your district over the course of a school year. I pulled this right off of the DPI website, so once it becomes public, anyone can go out and view this and grab it and click into those links and see kind of what's behind that data. But this is a really good example, and I think shows really well how the September and January counts work together to create an average for the purpose of calculating the FTE that is used for an aid calculation. So you can see on the top there, this is from 24-25 because that's the last public data that is available out on DPI right now. So you can see that in September of 2024, your count was 3,804, and then to January of 2025, you dropped slightly to 3,793. So then this really does a good job of walking through that calculation to get down to the 4,035. So it's taking those 2 numbers together, adding it up to get the 7,597, averaging those out, adding on any summer school. You can see in 24-25, you have the parental choice and special needs scholarship students in there, independent charter school students, and then you do have a small FTE for group and foster home students in there, and also some part-time students attending. So that's really the walkthrough on how you get to that 4,035 used for the purpose of your equalization aid calculation. So how does membership drive district finances? Again, this could have been a test question for you guys. I pulled this from another presentation that we talked about through revenue limit. And this is a specific Germantown. These are Germantown's numbers. We calculate our membership, again, based off of, in membership in the revenue limit is based off of that 3-year rolling average. So you get the 3,795. You multiply that by the max revenue per member. That is a number that comes from the state. You add on any exemptions. In this case, it's just over $3.2 million in exemptions. That could be things like transfer of service, declining enrollment, things of that nature. And then if you do that calculation, you end up getting your total revenue limit of authority of 47.4, almost 47.5 million. The important thing to remember off of this, especially when it comes to revenue limits, because it determines your spending authority. So if you're getting more students coming in, that's giving you a higher revenue limit authority. Fewer students is giving you a lower revenue limit authority. So when we think about the fact that fewer students gives you a lower revenue limit authority, so you're getting less revenue in a year. So how does that conversation start to go when your district is experiencing declining enrollment? The really tricky thing about declining enrollment is, and I'm just using example numbers here. So say that your district, so you have 3,700 students in your district, you lose 100 students. That's a lot of students. But when you think about when you think about how those students could potentially be spread out, the chance of all of them coming from one building is probably pretty slim. And because of that, that doesn't give the district the ability to just say, okay, we're losing 100 students. That automatically means that we're cutting one FTE, right? Because those students could be so spread out that you can't cut a third grade teacher, right? Like that's challenging. So that's one of the biggest issues that districts are facing when it comes to declining enrollment, because your revenue really does decrease faster than your costs can be reduced. And the same could be said the other way too, right? If you're bringing in more students, you're still not getting the revenue quick enough to cover those additional expenses that you would have if you have to add a section because you get more students, because it is based off of that 3-year rolling average. So think about those, even if declining enrollment is happening, your fixed costs are still there. Buildings, transportation, utilities, that core staffing, those are all very high cost items that can't just easily go away, even if that 100 students does feel really significant for your district. So open enrollment, switching gears just a little bit, and how does that impact the district? So first, what is open enrollment? So in the state of Wisconsin, students have the opportunity to open enroll into a Wisconsin school district that is, so they can attend a district that's outside of their resident district. So they can live in Germantown and choose to open enroll to Cedarburg. Through the open enrollment program, they don't have to pay any type of tuition. The caveat is the district that they want to go to, or if they wanted to come to Germantown, Germantown has to have open seats for them to come into. So in January, and this past January as a board, you likely approved a number of open enrollment seats. You said to the public, hey, we have availability for you to come into our district. You have to specify the grade level that they are in, and those are the only seats that you are able to welcome open enrollment students into. The important thing to note with open enrollment and to always remember is that the money follows the student. When we talk about, so if you have a student in Germantown, they make the decision to go to Cedarburg, that money then goes with them, and the school district of Germantown has to pay the school district of Cedarburg and vice versa. So when we think about how open enrollment then impacts the district, so first your membership is decreasing, so you're losing students. So that is going to right off the bat impact your revenue limit authority. And like we talked about, many of those costs that still exist within the district remain unchanged because you're not seeing a mass exodus, right? On the other side, open enrollment in, you're seeing that membership increase. It's a great thing. And then also your revenue limit authority is increasing as well. So this is just a table that I put together that just shows open enrollment out versus open enrollment in. So as an example, what happens when someone open enrolls out? So a resident student is attending another public school district. On the other side, open enrollment in, a non-resident student is attending Germantown. So then if you walk through this, you can see in each scenario or in each situation how that impacts membership, what the revenue limit impact is, what the potential financial impact, it could be the cost impact, right, where district's costs remain much unchanged when you have open enrollment out. From a budget perspective, when students are open enrolling out, you get that immediate loss of revenue without that matching immediate cost reduction. And then long-term considerations, when you're thinking about open enrollment out, if you continue to lose students, that can create kind of a structural financial pressure. And that's why you want to be able to look ahead and look back and understand that historical growth or shrinking of your open enrollment out, and really start to understand why. Like if you're seeing that upward pressure, if students are continuing to open enroll out, it's not a bad thing to, reach out to those families, do some outreach and say, hey, why are you leaving the Germantown School District? Is there a pattern that's now starting to be created? So it just opens the door for further conversation. And then again, just the key takeaway for out and in is obviously students leaving reduce the financial resources available to the district, and students coming in increase the financial resource. When we look at Germantown's history of open enrollment in versus out, so going back to 16-17 again, you can see So in, out, and then the difference between the in and out. And then based on the dollar amount that is tied to an open enrollment student, you can see the net transfer impact. Just for reference, the open enrollment dollar amount for 25-26 is $10,102. So each student that open enrolls out, we're paying $10,102 for. Each student coming in, we're receiving $10,102 for. And that number we've seen it to continue to increase. So from 18-19, that amount has gone up about 27%. And that number comes through the state budget every 2 years. So every 2 years, it's evaluated and determined if that wants to increase or decrease. So key takeaway for open enrollment, again, when student leaves a district, that revenue follows the student out. When they're coming in, that revenue follows the student in. And it is directly impacting your membership counts, your revenue limit, and your long-term financial planning. Shifting gears to feel like the hot topic in the state, voucher programs and how they ultimately impact the school district. So what are vouchers? So similar to how parents have the opportunity to choose if they want to open enroll their student elsewhere, parents now have the choice to participate in the private school choice program, which allows a student to attend a participating private school using publicly funded tuition payments. Kind of the key touch points when it comes to vouchers is that this is a state-funded tuition payment that supports the student attendance. Families, if they are interested in attending a private school via a voucher, have to apply through DPI-approved programs. And I put this last point on here because, so DPI is unable to provide information on what students are participating or what school the students are even attending, which is fine because I would say districts don't necessarily need to know the student or that level of information, but because they are unable to provide that, we don't know this information up front. So we literally, districts get this information, the number of students or the FTE of the students, when we get our close to final revenue limit worksheet in October. So that data lacks a lot and it can make planning very hard. I remember when I was in a district, we had low voucher private school choice program attendance, and so we had that for a couple of years. And so when I was planning my budget for the next year, I said, okay, I think it's going to stay flat. And we saw a huge jump, and we had no way to plan for that because that information just is not available to districts. So when we think about how vouchers impact district finances, so it can lead to state aid adjustments, which again, state aid has that inverse relationship with the levies. That's a property tax impact. It can have a local financial impact. So the way that the voucher expense works is that the district has to incur that expense. So say it's $100,000. We have to budget for that expense, but then we have the ability to levy for that amount to offset. And we'll go through in a little bit so you can kind of see that impact that has had on the Germantown levy. This is, again, information I pulled from DPI, so this is available to anyone that wants to look at this. There is more information on this, but I just wanted to pull off kind of the voucher programs that are a little bit more prevalent and more talked about. Like I said, this document has much more information on it, but this lists out by program. So the first one we're looking at is the Wisconsin Private School Voucher Program. And in this, you can see for 25-26, the amount of money that the voucher, that private school is receiving on a per pupil basis. And so we compare this a lot when we're trying to, as school districts, trying to negotiate during the biennial budget, how do we get, so talking about our per pupil or even the open enrollment amount, because remember our open enrollment amount for 25-26 is $10,102. That's how much money we're getting for a student coming into our district. But you can see here for private schools, they're getting, depending on the age or grade level, $10,877 or $13,371. This just kind of takes you through how this impacts district's finances. So that first one is, are these students counted in resident district state aid? No. On the second one too, it talks about, so in that situation, yes, it is counted. So this is just a really good resource out there for people wanting to know more about how this funding for vouchers compares to public schools. The other one that is highly talked about is the special needs private school vouchers. So this is specifically for students with special needs who wish to attend a private school. And again, you can see how those dollar amounts of $16,000, $10,877, that $13,371, how that really compares to the dollar amounts and the per pupil amounts that school districts are receiving. And then same thing, it talks about what the funding sources are. Is it counted in resident district state aid? Yes. Is it counted in district's revenue limit? No. And then just some additional information. So when we think about Germantown and how the district is impacted by the voucher program, so in the last public poll of information, which I believe this is 24-25, the special needs scholarship program had 45.4 student FTE participating in a voucher program, so that's about $685,000. The Wisconsin Choice Program, there's 157.1 FTE, which equates to $1.8 million for a total of under $2.5 million. So I mentioned earlier that a district has to budget for the expense of voucher students. So you're budgeting for that $2 million, whatever it may be, and then a district can levy for that. So what this graph is really highlighting is, so the blue bar, the smaller bar, is what your mill rate would be without the voucher expense and without having to levy for the voucher expense. And the orange bar is what your actual levy, including that full expense for the vouchers. That first one is 23-24, 24-25, 25-26. So you can see there's a pretty significant impact that voucher expense and you needing to levy for that had on your taxpayers from a mill rate perspective. So how do you plan for all this, and what do you need to consider as you move forward? So again, when we see that decrease of students, in some cases you may not just be able to make really big decisions around what staffing could look like. You may not be able to make really big decisions about what a building now looks like, and are you closing classrooms, are you opening classrooms, are you building new schools, right? Those are all very long-term, very expensive decisions, and it gets really hard to, number one, nail down what your actual enrollment is. Kudos to Brittany. I mean, I know does a lot of work around forecasting out, looking historically at her enrollment and then forecasting out and looking ahead and trying to plan for that, so that some decisions can be made long-term about staffing, facilities, programming, things of that nature. So that really does highlight the importance of having long-term budgeting at the forefront and having those conversations well before you think you might be impacted. And when you think about enrollment forecasting, again, it can be really hard to nail down, especially when you think about trying to figure out how many 4K students are coming in. That's a shot in the dark because you don't always know what 4K students are out there, right? So it really is relying on capturing that history of your enrollment so that you can maybe identify some trends and work to monitor those. And again, really focusing on planning multiple years ahead. If you think about having to, in a really good situation, increasing the size of your buildings, in a bad situation, reducing the size of your footprint, right? But that's not a decision that can be made from one year to the next. Likely districts in those situations have been having conversations for years because they've seen those trends. And then through all of that, you have the really tough job of working to align your spending with your enrollment realities. So living within your means, making those tough decisions really to, in the long run, benefit the district so that all students that are here can be awarded through that. So in summary, if I picked 5 bullet points. Number one, and this is not just for this, we've learned this through this series, that student membership really is the foundation of school finance. It drives every decision that you have to make as leaders. Count dates directly affect your funding, so it's important that those are done well and done accurately. Open enrollment and vouchers can shift financial resources. Like we talked about, we don't always know what that's going to be, so it can sometimes be a little bit of a surprise. declining enrollment can definitely create long-term budget pressure. And lastly, and I mean, I've been really impressed my last times here just hearing the conversations and the questions that have come out of the board level, and I think that you guys have got this, but strategic planning really is essential for financial stability. And that's it. That is it.
Well, the material was real easy to go through in the packet. You know, it's just that trying to understand it could be a little bit tough. So we can read the words, but what it says is kind of off the wall in some cases. So a question for you on the voucher program. I think what you were saying is we don't get to include the student as a member, but we are paying for it out of our budget. You know, is that what's going on?
Yeah, so you, so if the, based on that per pupil amount that we, based on these dollar amounts, so basically what happens is in October, the Department of Public Instruction, because voucher, students who are attending voucher schools, they have to apply through the Department of Public Instruction. So they're counting all of these students by FTE, applying it to that number, and then giving the district that dollar amount as an expense. I forgot to mention on this slide, so the top line is prior to 2015-16, and then the bottom line is references right after 15-16. So they are counted in the resident district state aid calculation, but not in the revenue limit calculation. So that's why the district has that expense. So 100 students times, I don't know, 13,371. We get that dollar amount as an expense. We budget for it as an expense. And then we levy for it that exact dollar amount, or you should levy for that exact dollar amount, so that you don't absorb that expense. And then because that is how it's getting into your revenue limit calculation, and that's how it's impacting your overall levy and mill rate.
Okay. Okay, so I see the column changed there, counted in residence district state aid. First it was no, and
Correct.
later it was yes. So I think I concentrated on the no word there and didn't really see the second one. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, and so districts essentially act as the pass-through, right? Or taxpayers are acting as the pass-through for funding of vouchers. And so that's why you hear a lot right now, maybe it's calmed down a little bit, but around state budget time, and I think it'll come up again, is they call it the decoupling of vouchers. So pulling it out of school districts being that pass-through and having it be separate so that it creates a little bit more transparency around the cost of the program is the kind of the idea behind it.
Okay, and are those numbers on the left there, are those the numbers used for all school districts in the state?
Yes, yep. Those numbers, along with the open enrollment number, is set during the state biennial budget. So these numbers also increase every other year.
Okay, and I don't know if you would know, but I have no idea what private school tuition is, but I think, well, in at least one case I know, it's a lot higher than that number. So do the private schools kind of get screwed, you know, when they take voucher students, or how does that work? You know, there's a local school here whose the tuition is probably $30,000 a year, maybe 40.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that far away. I don't know if they take voucher students, but if they do, and they're getting those numbers, I don't think it works for them.
Yeah.
Getting tuition.
Yeah, so they're getting tuition from other students, and now they're getting these dollar amounts. And I do want to recognize too, something that you did say is a good point to bring up, is private schools can choose not to participate in the program.
Yeah.
Just like we talked about during grants, private schools don't have to take grant dollars from public schools. It is completely a choice. So.
Okay, yes, so they're looking at the numbers and they can decide. All right. And then on the open enrollment in, open enrollment out, I think the board has struggled a little bit with, if we take open enrollment in, is that costing our taxpayers anything? It looks like the numbers that you were using, probably not, or it was very little. Maybe the numbers were within $1,000, but I think in the past we thought open enrollment in was a higher number than what your numbers were showing in the open enrollment in or out calculations. Can you say or no?
Well, what was the question?
Well, I think we as a board thought that open enrollment in students were costing local taxpayers quite a bit of money, as much as $5,000 or $6,000 maybe, from a few years ago when we were kind of arguing about, how many open enrollment students we were going to accept. And I think the numbers here that Sarah has presented, it costs us either nothing or maybe $1,000 per student for open enrollment in, or maybe it's nothing. I don't. It's hard to say for sure. That's why I'm asking the question.
So,
Wait,
go ahead.
You.
So, like as an example here, so when we look at 24-25, so you have more students open enrolling out than you have students coming in. So you have a higher expense than you do revenue. So you're at a negative there, but from a pure thinking about like a single open enrollment student, it really is dependent, right? Because you could have a student who, and a lot of districts, and I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Germantown accepts students with special needs through their open enrollment program.
We don't have any seats.
Oh, so no
Yeah,
seats.
no seats, right.
So, okay, so say that you did have a seat and you had an open enrollment student come in. A lot of districts are in the situation where they're not opening up students for special education seats because the potential of those students carrying such high costs,
Will exceed the.
yes, will
amount
exceed
of
the
money we
$10,102. And it's not out of the question that you could have a student that is general education, right? They might come really close to qualifying for an IEP or something along those lines, but they don't. But they're still more expensive than a student who doesn't need any services. It's also a hard balance when you're thinking about, as a district, how many open enrollment seats you open up, right? Because it's really tempting to open up all of these seats, get that $10,000 per student coming in.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so bring in, students get $10,000 per student, but at what point are you then having to, is that one open enrollment student pushing your fifth grade, pushing you over the limit in fifth grade? Now you're opening up a whole new section and having to hire a new FTE. So it's a very fine balance of determining, when you're having the conversations around open enrollment seats, to make sure that you're not, and some districts want to, right? Some districts want to create additional revenue and they're okay with also creating the expense that goes along with it. But really, financially prudent thing to do is really you don't want your open enrollment numbers to push you over the edge of now you're creating all of these new expenses.
Yeah. So, I think it's what you're getting at is how much does an open enrollment student dollar-wise come with as they come into our district versus how much do we spend on an average student in our district, which is the conversation this board's typically had. And the answer there is they come with less than we expend on an average. But the reality is, what she's explaining is, it depends individually on the student how much less they come in, because if they're pushing a 504 and we're not doing the IEP because we won't accept it as part of the open enrollment, given all the extended expense that comes with it, right? Because then that number just balloons well above what they come with. That's the conversation I think we've typically had in the past. So we could cost average it for how much do we spend on each student, what that number is, Brittany could tell us, versus what they're saying an open enrollment in student brings with them, then where do we end up? And I think it's always been the answer's negative. Because we expend more on a student than what state aid is.
Right, right. Back to the voucher students. I believe there's a maximum family income that they can have in order to do that. So not just anybody can go for vouchers. You have to be at a certain family income or less to be able to go for the voucher program.
I believe that is accurate, and I do not know what that is off the top of my head.
And then
Okay.
I don't think if they're in the voucher program that they get free tuition through their private school. I think they get a discounted tuition rate, if I'm correct.
They get a discounted, I think that is right, they get the discounted tuition rate, and then the school, so the private school gets, so if they have 10 students coming in through the voucher program, so they're getting the tuition, reduced tuition from the families, but then they're also getting a payment from the state
Right.
of that chunk of money.
So if there's a family that qualifies for a voucher and they get the 10,000 or the 13,000, whatever the number is, it doesn't necessarily mean that family goes to the private school for free, necessarily.
Okay, so there may be some out-of-pocket
Right, so
expense.
saying that the private school is not, like if the example you gave was $30,000
yeah,
or
30
something
or
for
40.
tuition, and they're getting 10 from the state, doesn't mean that they're not making themselves whole from a different,
From that voucher.
from that voucher.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
student.
So is it kind of like the state will pay 10,000 and the family pays 10,000?
Something, I don't
Something
know
like
what
that,
their
you know?
agreements are, or to be honest, they could increase the other, the rest of the people that are going to the school to 35,000, just to make up the difference. But they're trying to get students into their schools, so being able to say that you, for example, would only pay 20 because we're getting the 10 because we qualify for the voucher, but we're still getting the student. And you can afford the 20 versus the 30 or 35, so I will now attend there.
Right, okay.
And I believe most of the school districts, when the voucher program became, was that we weren't losing students to go to the private school. Like, they were always private school students. And then they just became eligible for the voucher that was created. So it's, I can't state because we don't get the names, that every single private school voucher student was always private school. But when it started, there was a lot of school districts that were going out to try to figure out, like, did so-and-so leave our district and go to that private school? And there was a lot of phone calls made, surveys made, and a lot of them were private school kids are ready and not public school that left for private school.
That's a really good point, yeah.
Along those thoughts, can we go to, I think it's, mine's page, the Germantown snapshot, the net where it's got the net transfer, student transfer.
Oh, sure, yep, this one.
So in 2016-17, we were minus 10. Right now, we're minus 73. Of that minus 73, are those all students going open enrollment to another public school?
Yes, so this is.
That doesn't count
Correct.
students we're leaving, not losing, but just live in our district but enroll in a parochial school.
No.
No, this is capturing students that are choosing to go to enroll into another public school district. And so that 73 is just the difference between your open enrollment out versus your in.
And also could be a public school, virtual school.
Correct. And we do see a lot of that, especially after COVID. There's an increase in, because there's one in Waukesha. I know when I was in Mequon, we saw a lot of kids go to the Waukesha or Northern Ozaki virtual school. That was definitely more prevalent after COVID.
So, and that was 2020. You guys, well, you two would have been on the board, 3 would have been on the board, and there was a exploration into a charter public online school. Part of the thought, and that was that scenario, that they could attract students in, as well as, instead of losing our students out to the Waukesha school or one of the others, they would retain within a charter school in our district. But technically that number would still be, because the charter school is, would they be enrolled into that instead of Germantown?
Right.
there was a lot of problems that came up with that
Right.
thing, and it was the right decision not to go forward with
We
it.
remember.
Yeah, but just in general, yeah, just in general, like that was part of the conversation around it, with the anticipation, especially with the amount of money that was being dangled for all districts to create that. Do you want to be left out in the cold with that? And I still think it was 100% the correct decision, because the layers getting peeled back on that and span of control issues would have been a wild time.
Yeah.
And cost you more. Cost us more. Yes.
Well, any other questions for Sarah?
I had a quick question. Looking at the historical enrollment, you said that you'd seen a lot of similar trends across other districts. So are other districts seeing that drop between last year and this year as well?
Between last year and this year, that I don't know. I just know that on average, the trend from 1920 to 2021, districts did see that large drop. I will say, I don't think it is common for a lot of districts to have come back up in the way that Germantown did, because there were a lot of communities that they went out, they found alternatives, and they stayed in those alternatives. So yeah, so that I don't know, I can't speak to the trend from last year to this year, just the drop from COVID.
Well, we do know we have larger graduating classes than we do incoming 4th K, 5K classes. That's
And I
been
think
a
that's-
discussion of this board.
I do think that's across the state that you're seeing graduating classes in the 300s and 4K or kindergarten, not 4K necessarily, but kindergarten classes coming in like the 240s, 250, 256-ish ranges. They're stating that people are having less children or children as they're getting older than. So I don't think this is different. I mean, I don't think, I'm sure there's district out there that aren't having drops, but I think the majority of them are experiencing declining enrollment. And when I first saw the graph, I'm like, why does it look like we dropped like half the amount of students? But it's just, I mean, the way she did it was 50 by 50, 50 students. So I'm like, what happened here? So there is still a drop. I was just like, that looks a lot larger than it actually is, because of the way the graph is created.
Yeah.
And this is why when we look at our ROFRS report, our student enrollment projection report that we did, it's advocating for development within the village to increase move-in families to help support and level off our enrollment. And that's why if you read it, it advocates you should encourage the plans that are coming forward, because it'll level us off over till 2040. I think it's what the report goes out to. And we should be like net neutral. So like this number should stop going down as that development comes up.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear that you're working with MD Roffers. His work is very reputable. He's very accurate. I don't know how he does it, but that's again, when we talk about long-term forecasting and planning and budgeting, that's a great tool to have in your toolbox.
Tracy?
If we can go to the revenue limits with the green circles at the bottom. I think you had mentioned,
Here we are. Okay.
I think you mentioned for max revenue per member, 11,652. I think you said that was our number. Is that the same across all districts in Wisconsin?
So it is not, but the calculation to get to that number is.
Okay. So what's an example or two of where districts get more revenue per member, so that, because I think we sent out a thing 2 years ago, that showed certain districts like in Elmbrook over the course of 10 years received a lot more max revenue per student than we did, and we received more than others, but I think we're towards the lower half. So can you speak to that a little bit, as far as, okay, we get 11, call it 11.5, some other district A gets 13. Like, why is that the case? And what, in your opinion, is there anything that can be done other than going to Madison and saying, this is ridiculous? What can be done?
Yeah, so and this is where it's beneficial to be able to compare to other districts, but it also gets really hard to compare to other districts, because there is so much going on behind the scenes that we don't all know about, right? And so when I'll give the example of MEC1. So when I left MEC1, we were in a period of pretty heavy declining enrollment. So on our revenue limit, we had a declining enrollment exemption. We had a hold harmless exemption to pair with that. So when we got that additional $325 per pupil, which would help to increase this, it all got eaten up because of those declining enrollment exemptions. So that's one example that could be leading to that. Obviously, district size is going to change your max revenue per member. But what I think it really goes back to, and when we talked about revenue limits and when revenue limits came to be in 93, 94, remember we talked about how every district was at a different point in 93, 94 because maybe they were using their budget to do a facilities project because you could do that before revenue limits came into play. Or maybe you were a really low spending district, you prided yourself on being a low spending district, so when revenue limits went into effect, you saw per pupil amounts all over the board because of how differently districts were spending. And that either in today's world, that either hurts you or helps you. So I don't know if you want to.
Because you were locked in.
You were locked in, yes.
With that rate. So whatever was happening that year, districts didn't plan for that. So they were doing whatever they were doing that year, and they locked you in. They're trying throughout the years to try to make it more equal. But like she stated, if someone was more financially aware and wasn't spending, or someone was going through a project where they're going to do a new construction, you were locked in at that rate, and a lot of districts are locked in the low rate, and that's why the number is different between the 11.6 or the 11.5 and the 13, for example.
Sorry for putting you on the spot,
No,
but
no,
I think I think the history of it is so important because of the fact that it's really a point in time. What did each district look like, and how are they managing things? And at that moment in time, they may have needed to increase their spending on a building or improvements or whatever else. And in some ways, they lucked out because it's that moment in time where other districts who didn't have those needs were able to kind of keep things on the level, or at least as low as theoretically possible. Kind of at that moment in time, potentially got really hurt, and especially since 93. A lot of years went by, so just imagine we did I think it was a 10-year, 5-year, add that many more years to it, Germantown versus somebody else, there's this discrepancy that really becomes, you thought her graph where it dropped, I mean, it's that sort of thing. I think that's an important thing for people to kind of understand and realize is like, this isn't just a recent thing. This is a long-term thing, and if you really look at the numbers from 93, 94 till now, there's a lot of haves and a lot of have-nots. It's not a Germantown thing. It's a lot of haves and a lot of have-nots across the state.
Yes, I would agree.
The historical enrollment graph. Sorry if you can go to that quick. Brittany, this is my understanding is this gets averaged over a 3-year. So when you have this 1-year dip or spike, it's more predictable. So in 2020, 21, when we dropped from 38.74 to 37.42, that's actually a 3-year run where that manages. So now when we're dropping from 38.17 to 37.04, if we were to bounce back up in the following year, right, or even just a little bit, that kind of gets our line to really be a little more predictable.
Right. So she was explaining declining enrollment. So for this example right here, you would take those 3 last years, and you come up with your average, right? And if you see a decline over the years, you get an exemption on your revenue limit. But when that becomes flat, you'll lose that exemption. So for example, if it went up 50 students next year, your average would go off, and you could lose that declining enrollment, which is good and also bad, because the amount you go up could not equal the amount you're losing.
Yeah.
Because you can increase just the right number where it's equal, but sometimes you're increasing students, which is great in the long term, but for that year you're like, I received $350,000 in declining enrollment. We got the students, which is great for your future, but you only received $250,000, so now you have a deficit of $100,000 there.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
All right, any more questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Maybe,
much.
Thank you.
yeah, this was a really good series.
Well, and I know I've said it multiple times, but I really applaud you guys for doing this. I know you talked about other things outside of school finance, but school finance is a really complex topic. And the more that you can keep engaging with people about it and helping them to bring understanding, I think the better for you.